Welcome to the Authoritative Coach podcast with me, your host, Chris Marr. In these episodes, I'm sharing with you tried and tested tools, techniques, tips, questions, all the things that I use and have been using over my career as a coach over the last 10 or 12 years. In this episode 4 of the Authoritative Coach podcast, I'm going to be sharing with you questions and scenarios where you're going to be delegating the problem back to the client. It sounds counterintuitive, but the last thing we want to do is be in a situation where we're taking the blame and trying to justify ourselves for problems that happen in the work that we're doing. The first thing to do is to figure out what is the real problem here and to be able to coach your client through it. So let's get into it. So when your client comes to you with a problem, right? Let's say the problem is somehow related to the work that you're doing. There's this natural, I think, human reaction to want to somehow take the blame for it, right? Or to think that it's our fault, right? And so let's say the client comes to you like, we've been producing all this content, we're doing exactly what you say we're doing, Chris, but we aren't getting the results from it. Our traffic's not going up, we're not getting enough leads, blah, blah, blah. Or like there's something like the sales team are underperforming even though we've been doing all this coaching and things like that. You know, so the client comes to you and says, like, we're having these problems, and your natural reaction is to be like, must be me. Must be, I'm doing something wrong. Client must want to leave. They don't want to pay us any money. They're not getting value from this work. And so we go into this sort of like protecting ourselves and thinking it's our fault. But it's not about you. It's never about you. And that's the problem, right? Is that we make it about ourselves. And so what we have to do is train ourselves, teach ourselves how to, when the problem comes to us, to be able to not let it be our problem, that we don't personalize it, and we're able to somehow rise above it or step a step to the side, not making it about us, but to coach the person in this particular moment. And so when problems come up, and they inevitably will come up, you can't get ahead of every single problem. You want to not do this like visceral reaction to be like, it's my fault, but and then like do this reaction which might be to like justify your work somehow, and you get into this like monologue. You see all the time. It's like a defensive reaction. It doesn't solve anything. In fact, it makes things worse oftentimes. So when you get into these difficult situations, these potentially high stakes situations, what are you going to do differently here that really puts you in a position of control and leadership where you're asking questions, to diagnose the real problem. But ultimately what you're doing here, and you've probably heard me talk about this before, is you're essentially delegating the problem back to the client. Even if the client's intention, I don't even think this is always conscious when the client comes in and they're like almost saying it is your fault. It is your fault that this problem has been created, and I expect you to solve it. And because they don't want to take the blame for it, or they want to find somebody else to blame. It's like the easiest thing. Some clients, like, so for example, when as a coach, I'm actually really comfortable if the client wants to, quote unquote, hit me with a stick, and let them do it. Let's get it out. And then we can actually have a proper conversation about what's really going on, right? And so they think they're making a lot of assumptions. They got caught up in the problem, wanting someone to blame. But in fact, what you're doing as a coach is you're essentially putting up a mirror and letting them see it from a different perspective. Let them see what you can see. And oftentimes as a coach, that's actually our job, is to notice that the behavior is getting in their way and to shine a light on it. They can't see it, but you can. That's the beauty of it. But you won't be able to see it clearly and know exactly what your role is if you go into a natural defensive protection reaction to the problem. Okay, so this is requires a real mindset shift in what your role is and when a problem comes to you from a client. Rise above, step aside, see the problem for what it is, behave objectively and rationally, and start to ask questions that really get to the root of the problem, but ultimately put it back over to the client and coach them through the problem, coach the person through the problem. And so let me give you some scenarios here with some key questions that I've used that have been really effective. Just remember, like, before I get into that, there's this other, like, and I'll put this in the show notes for you so you can go watch a short video about the drama triangle, right? The drama triangle is this idea that there's certain roles that we play, the rescuer being one of them. It seems to be, based on the conversations I've had with leaders, the most common one, to go in and want to rescue the clients from their problem. And no real learning happens when you rescue people from things. Instead, we want to shift from rescuer to coach to challenger, and use questions to really help them work through it so they can see it more clearly. So let me give you a couple of scenarios. And then remember to go and watch this video on the drama triangle as well. It's only 5 minutes or so, but it's hugely insightful to understand how and why to move from rescuer to coach. There's three roles in total, and I'm only focusing on one of them right now. So let's say, a real problem that came to me, I'm sort of generalizing it, but the real problem that came to me was our sales team is underperforming. And this was 6 months into our work. I'm already doing the sales. I'm doing the sales training. It's me that's invested in this, right? So it'd be easy for me to be like, it's must be my fault. I'm to blame. My work that I'm doing isn't effective. My training and coaching isn't working. I suck. They don't want to work with me anymore. They're going to cancel this contract. They're going to leave, right? I could naturally and quite easily fall into that bucket, right? And just my head could go right into there. And then I just start getting defensive. I can't see clearly. And ultimately, I'm just giving control over to the client, really, at this point, and to the problem. But instead, the question was, how have we allowed this to happen? That was the question. So how have we allowed this problem to occur? What factors have led to this problem? And that's me then taking the problem, seeing it, and then coming back in with a question that puts me in a position to manage the client through the problem, right? So it's the start of the conversation. It's not about me. It's not about me. It's never about me. Another simple problem could be anything technical, like our traffic isn't increasing. We thought we'd be here by this time, blah, blah, blah. There's like all these things to do with outcomes and results. And of course, that we can't control outcomes and results. We can only influence them by the work that we do, of which we have total control over, right? The inputs. You could naturally go into a monologue, just like what I just did there, about justifying it, right? Here's why we're not getting the results yet. We're not doing this. We're not doing that. It's going to take time. When we started this program, we talked about the fact that we need to have long-term expectations, long-term thinking, investment in the work. You could just go on a big monologue about all of this and start to justify it all. And you could even start talking about all the agreements that we made at the beginning about why we're doing this and why it's important that are beyond results. You can go into all of that. But it's all noise. It's all noise. And so you want to get into a position where you're like coaching the client through the problem. So what factors have led to this problem? What assumptions are we making? What have we missed? What are we not doing that we should be doing that would allow us to make more progress in this area? Do you feel that everybody that's working on this project is really doing everything that they could? Where have we been distracted? How long are we willing to let this continue? What are we going to do about it? What does support for me look like? What are the next steps? You're the coach. You're the leader. You're helping them to see the problem objectively and rationally. You're not just going to sit back and take the blame. You're also not going to allow it to become about you, so you react in a sort of way where you want to justify and prove yourself. You're going to, like I said, rise above the problem and actually coach the person through it in a rational and an objective way. Now, at the outcome of that, there might be certain things that you and your team could be doing differently or better, and we would make those agreements. But ultimately, it's a much more adult conversation. It's so much more about leadership here, and it's less about what we don't want to have happen is we get into a fight, a debate about who said what, who didn't do this, who should have done that. That's not what it's all about. It's about realigning ourselves on the work that we need to do. It's almost like the assumption that you're making going in here as a leader or as a coach is, Well, we are going to continue to work together. You're not making the worst case scenario assumption, which is that they're going to cancel the contract or they're going to cancel the work. You're actually making the assumption that we are going to continue together, and my job is to find our way through that. I'm going to find, what does progress look like here? How do we take the problem and move through it instead of allowing ourselves to get stuck in it? And so you could even ask yourself this question now that we've been through this is, how often do you find that you and your team do get stuck in problems? How often do we find ourselves having conversations about the backstory of problems? How often do we find ourselves trying to justify our work with a client to try and prove that what we're going to do is going to work, instead of really getting to the person that we need to coach through it? That's really the art of masterful coaching at that point, is to be able to focus on the person. That's exactly what we're doing here with questions like, how have we allowed this to happen? What factors have led to this problem? How long are we willing to let this continue? What do we need to do about it? Those are the questions that we use to challenge our clients to think differently about the problems, to lead them through it. And if you've listened to some of the other episodes that I've published for you, you're looking at things like radical candor and challenging directly, and ultimately getting to this point where you're like, I'm not going to sit back and watch my client fail here. I'm going to challenge them. I'm going to push them. We're going to think differently about this. And ultimately, not only do you add more value to the relationship with your client, your relationship gets stronger and deeper, and your client wants to continue to work with you because you're challenging them in ways that other people are not challenging them. And then that becomes your value. As always, I'm interested to hear how you're using all of this, right? There's a lot, it's a short episode, but there's a lot in it, right? How is this shifting the way that you're thinking? How are these questions shifting your relationship with your people, with your clients, with your team? How are you being able to use this as part of the conversations that you're having to be a better leader, to be a better coach, to be more valuable for the people that you're working with? All my details are in the show notes. You can email me, you can jump into the community, you can add me on LinkedIn, get me on Instagram, all over the place. Connect with me, let me know what's happening in your world. How can I help? What's a scenario that you're working on right now that you're finding challenging? What's a scenario in the past that you felt I could have, if I had known all of this, I would have actually responded in a more confident or better way? I'm interested in all of it. So what's on your mind? Get in touch with me. I look forward to hearing from you. I'll see you next time.